is markets. Everything to the bankers is markets. The expansion of their sphere of influence. Wherever the bankers go, the first thing that they do is they set up a military perimeter. They know we're here. But so what people have to understand is that people listening to this is that, remember, there was no telephones, there was no roads, there was no highway cars, any way of yes. And so, but the banking systems, wherever they went, they were ports. They were all little city states. And those city-states would have a political structure that the bankers would control. The military, they would put in the governor that would control the military in there. And so and when people talk of rights and all these things that we think that so many people take for granted, that was not the way that these commercial city-states were run. If you cross. You had no rights. No, if you
the bankers, the people that had all the money had all the rights.
They controlled the guns.
And they didn't pretend about it.
No, but it was from generation to generation. Like Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was Carter's foreign affairs advisor. He comes from a 6th century Venetian family. So these families, when they do not go out and marry for love. They marry for economic reasons. There's mergers of families, like there was with royalty. The royalty, you do not marry for love. You marry whoever they designate you marry, because you are creating a political combination to enhance your strength. Now, the bankers can't come out and say, we're going to be the rulers. They did that in Venice, finally. But if they came out today and just pulled back the curtain and said, we are your rulers, well, they would be no. So they operate through politicians. They operate through the church, the Catholic Church. They operate through their other agents. They're always in the background manipulating all of this that is going on. But early on, before newspapers and all the rest of it, they really had no need to conceal, because the people couldn't read. There was no way of educating people. Most people were illiterate, and so they were tillers of soil. Or up until the Industrial Revolution, they would have cottage industries. The family, you'd have a family here, and you'd be weavers, and the sons would be out doing this, and the mothers would be running the looms and this kind of thing. You had this cottage industry, and you had these banking families, and you had the royalty because of it was a feudal system, kings and counts and dukes, and the feudal systems were in different degrees centralized in many whoever the duke was.
Is there a map somewhere? Someone laid out the banking families, feudal system of the banking families. Which banking family controlled Germany, which one controlled Hesse, the state of Hesse, and Bavaria, and France?
Really, the critical movement started when I mentioned when the Ottomans overran, and that shifted, and the New World was discovered. Then all the wealth from the New World, remember, they're always looking after markets and materials. What they're after is raw materials. England became the industrial center. That's where the Industrial Revolution started in England, because it controlled the seas, and it could go to these foreign countries and get the materials, buy the raw materials cheap. Then they'd bring them back to England, and they would process them and manufacture them and create the wealth by going through the manufacturing process and then selling those finished products around the world. And by controlling all of the seas, they destroyed the Spanish fleets and the Spanish Armada. That was their first big kill. And then they destroyed the Dutch fleets. New York, which was New Amsterdam, became New York.
Right.
And so it then, starting in about 1700, when the bankers took over England, when the Bank of England was created, then they systematically eliminated first the Dutch went, and then the French. They had France was the preeminent continental power, and they were allying themselves. You saw that chart where they become the friend and the foe of every other country in Europe.
Kind of interesting.
And so it's always England, the commercial center of the world, first partnering up with a maritime person to take on a third person, and then later partnering up with that third person to take on their former partner. So in the book,
Well, we're doing that with Japan. Japan was our enemy in World War II, and now they're our friend.
Well, England. I said, England, we fought the revolution, exactly what's going on today in Iraq, where foreign troops are coming in, kicking in doors, doing all this terrifying, killing people. The British were doing the same thing here in the colonies 225 years ago. We were able, because they were caught up in a war with France. France became our ally, what's called the French-Indian Wars that were weakening England. George Washington was a British soldier in the French-Indian Wars in 1750, 1760. He became then a general in the Continental Army, and we drove the English out. But 30 years later, they came back in when we closed the banks, and they sacked Washington, D.C. in the War of 1812.
Now say that again. Who closed the banks? They came in 1812?
Yes, when the United States, we did not renew the bank's charters, then in retaliation.
Banks
yes.
That had their roots where?
In England.
So we had American central banks with their roots.
Well, they tried to set up, Alexander Hamilton tried to create recreate that, and it was in place for a while, but then its charter was denied early on.
By Congress.
Yes, and they, in retaliation, sacked. That was the war. That was what prompted the War of 1812.